What if the moment you called overreaction in yourself was actually the verdict? Not rage, not revenge, but the silent sentence after years of evidence collected in the soul's courtroom. This is not the outburst of a dramatic person. It is the whisper of an empath who has finally seen the pattern, the breach, the subtle erosion of dignity passed off as love. And in that instant, they do not explode, they exit. Inside the psyche, the trial has already taken place. The persona tries to plead for harmony, the inner child trembles with unmet needs, and the shadow speaks the raw truth. The body remembers betrayals that words never touched, micro-abandonments, covert criticisms, shifting goalposts, smiles that punished. The empath, long trained to forgive quickly and blame themselves, suddenly pauses. In that pause, something sacred returns, discernment, and with it comes clarity, a quiet reallocation of energy. The emotional burdens that never belonged to them are handed back, not with cruelty, but with finality. What once looked like coldness is simply truth with the volume turned down. No more explaining, no more defending, no more rehearsing lines that keep the peace while killing the spirit. This is not a tantrum, it is a transformation. And the silence that follows is not emptiness, but emancipation. Because when the silent empath finally snaps back, they do not scream, they sentence. And their verdict is a life rebuilt on boundaries, truth, and inner peace. Can someone really fake being emotionally safe? Or does the truth always leak out in moments they don't control? Most people assume manipulation is loud, dramatic, or overtly cruel, but the most dangerous form is almost invisible. It hides behind warmth. It smiles with kindness. It compliments you while cutting off your voice. It doesn't scream. It softly rewrites your reality. This is why many empaths, especially those over 35 who have spent a lifetime absorbing others' energy, often confuse comfort with control. They've been praised for their tolerance and blamed for their reactions, so they question their intuition and give the benefit of the doubt. But inside the nervous system, something always knows. Manipulation often shows itself in 3 simple tests: rejection, time, and consent. These are the invisible interview questions that reveal a person's true wiring, and most people fail them without even realizing it. Say no and watch how they react. A person rooted in authenticity might pause, reflect, and say, "Thank you for telling me what's right for you." But a manipulator will glitch, ever so slightly. Maybe they guilt trip you, maybe they pout, maybe they go quiet for hours, then pretend nothing happened. But in that gap, they reveal what they truly wanted. Not connection, but compliance. Make them wait, not in cruelty, but in sovereignty. Watch their patience evaporate the moment they're not centered in your attention. The integrated soul honors your time and takes no offense. But the one seeking control may say nothing while building resentment like a silent weapon. They'll punish you through energy withdrawal, and they'll blame you for it when you call it out. Refuse intimacy you're not ready for. Say, "I need space," or "I'm not comfortable with that yet." If they truly respect your boundaries, you'll feel it. But if they're invested in performance, they'll scramble to maintain their image. Mask cracking, voice trembling, charm shifting into subtle coercion. Their need to be seen as good outweighs your need to feel safe. What exposes them isn't what they say, but how their nervous system responds when control is removed. The breath changes, the eyes flicker, the words become measured. There's tension where there used to be ease. And for the empath who has lived in survival mode too long, these shifts are not paranoia, they are signals. But here's the deeper truth. We must also check ourselves. Sometimes, the manipulator is the version of us who was taught to earn love through self-erasure, the one who says yes too fast, who avoids conflict at all costs, who fears being abandoned so much that we don't test anyone's character out loud. If we do not heal that part, we keep attracting mirrors that reflect it. Jung believed that what we fail to integrate, we will project. That includes the way we read others. True discernment isn't fueled by suspicion. It is born from self-clarity. When you learn to value your own time, honor your own no, and protect your own energy, you will recognize those who do the same, and you will repel those who cannot. So the next time someone feels off, but says all the right things, ask yourself, how did they respond when I disagreed? When did I delay? When I stood my ground? Those answers speak louder than any script, and sometimes it only takes 30 seconds to see what 100 conversations tried to hide. What if the most powerful response to betrayal is no response at all? Only the calm, sacred weight of your absence. We're taught to believe that clarity comes with confrontation, that we must explain, argue, and defend our boundaries with righteous fire. But the empath who has been pushed past their emotional threshold knows otherwise. After the final manipulation, the last gaslight, or the 1,000th quiet invalidation, something deeper awakens. It is not rage, it is not revenge, it is a revelation. Silence is not avoidance. It is the sacred space where truth echoes the loudest. When someone breaks your trust, your nervous system knows before your mind does. The breath shortens, the chest tightens. A subtle ache appears beneath the ribcage, like a whisper that something precious has been trespassed. In those moments, before the mind floods in with logic or guilt, there exists a window of pure knowing. The older you get, the more you may have filled it with noise, over-explaining, apologizing, or pleading to be understood. But the healed ones listen instead, and in that silence, you hear the verdict. This connection is no longer aligned with your peace. Instead of erupting, you execute a quiet recalibration. You write your boundaries like sacred architecture. I will no longer be available for emotional labor that is not mutual. I am no longer the audience for someone else's chaos. I do not abandon myself to keep someone else comfortable. These sentences don't need to be spoken to others. They need to be etched into your days. Then you reset your schedule. You cancel the call that leaves you drained. You move the appointment that never respects your time. You carve out 20 minutes for breath, for reflection, for coffee in the sunlight without a screen. These small acts are not petty. They are repairs. They are exits from the places where your value was never fully seen. And finally, you leave without a scene, not as an act of punishment, but as an act of return. You leave the room where you were only ever tolerated. You leave the cycle where love was earned like a wage. You leave the dynamic where silence was once your prison and now becomes your protection. In real life, this looks like choosing not to reply to a message that baited your guilt. It looks like stepping outside with your keys and remembering you don't need to explain where you're going. It looks like smiling at yourself in the mirror and realizing that, for the first time, your peace matters more than their permission. For empaths over 35 who have spent decades absorbing everyone else's noise, silence can feel uncomfortable at first, but soon it transforms. It becomes the sacred sound of your own return. The drama you didn't start no longer owns your attention. The person who triggered you no longer occupies your mental real estate. You come home to yourself. Jung once said, "Solitude is not necessarily the absence of noise, but the presence of oneself." When the empath finally learns that silence is not withdrawal but wisdom, their healing accelerates. No longer needing to prove, to fix, or to explain, they reclaim the one thing the manipulator could never give them: clarity. In the end, the quietest choice often becomes the most unforgettable one, and sometimes your silence says what your words never could. Have you ever stumbled upon an old message, journal entry, or voice memo and realized you had already seen the ending before the story collapsed? There's something hauntingly beautiful about the moment your past self meets your present clarity. Maybe it comes as a half-written note tucked into a journal, a draft email you never sent, or a voice memo you recorded at 2 a.m., whispering the very truth you were afraid to face. At the time, you may have ignored it, or doubted it, or gaslight yourself into staying longer. But now, standing on the edge of healing, you realize you were never blind. You were only hoping to be wrong. This is the sacred return. The empath, once drenched in self-doubt, revisits that quiet letter they had once buried. It is not a sign of failure, it is a sign of awakening. The patterns they wrote about were not paranoia, they were prophecy. The repetition of emotional withdrawal, the cycle of breadcrumb affection, the silences that felt like punishment, all of it had been seen, felt, documented, and still compassion delayed action. Now something shifts. That old note becomes a map. You honor your past self not with shame, but with reverence. You whisper, "You saw it, you tried, and now I'm listening." And listening turns into action. You back up your emotional data, not just in your devices, but in your soul. You remember the truth, not the illusion you tried to paint over it. You change the passwords to the emotional doors they used to access you, the ones labeled guilt, hope, and history. You reinforce those doors with new locks: discernment, boundaries, and grace. You close loops that once kept you entangled. You cancel recurring favors that were never reciprocated. You stop texting first. You stop explaining why you're quieter now. You realize closure doesn't come in the form of a conversation. It arrives when you stop rewriting the same paragraph in your heart. Real-life examples of this are everywhere, especially for those who've spent years in relationships where intuition was dismissed. A woman in her 40s rereads a journal from her 20s and sees the same apology cycle written word for word. A man in his 50s finds an old therapy worksheet and recognizes he had already outlined the red flags a decade ago. They are not embarrassed anymore. They are empowered, because now they're no longer trapped in the loop. They are the loop breaker. Jung taught us that the unconscious speaks in symbols long before the conscious mind catches up. That email from your younger self, that scribbled note in your phone, that gut feeling that kept returning like a wave against a rock, those were messages from your soul, time-locked and waiting for your readiness. The greatest healing doesn't come from becoming someone new. It comes from finally becoming the person your younger self always sensed you were meant to be. In that moment, the empath is no longer lost in someone else's story. They're holding their own letter, and for the first time, they're reading it all the way through. Have you ever looked back and realized that the signs were always there, just too subtle to be believed? Not loud, not obvious, just the quiet erosion of your self-trust. They didn't scream danger, but they whispered it, softly, consistently, like wind carving stone. The truth is, the most dangerous betrayals often begin not with what is said, but with the micro-signals we dismiss. A glance that avoids your eyes, a compliment that somehow turns back on them, a subtle shift in tone when others enter the room. These moments are small enough to justify, but deep enough to destabilize you from within. Take the woman who celebrated her promotion with a group of close friends, only to hear one of them casually deflect her achievement with, "We all knew someone would get lucky this year." She laughed it off until later, lying awake, that sentence repeated itself louder than the applause ever did. Or the man who realized his partner always looked at the clock during his stories as if his joy had a time limit. These are not accidents. These are patterns. When you're emotionally attuned, you feel everything. But sometimes you feel so much that you begin to question whether you're just being too sensitive. That's the trap. The world teaches empaths to second-guess themselves. But what if the very sensitivity you doubt is the skill you need to decode the truth? Let's translate those micro-moments into power. When their eyes dart toward the clock as you speak, tell yourself quietly, "My presence deserves attention, not tolerance." When they reroute praise that was meant for you, remind yourself, "Their insecurity cannot dim my light." And when triangulation happens, when someone tries to pull a third party into a private disagreement to gain control, hold the inner line, "I no longer perform to be safe." These are your 7-word shields, quiet, sharp, and effective. They end the game before it begins. Think of these cues as part of your internal navigation system. The empath's greatest gift is not just feeling others, but knowing themselves through what they feel. Those red flags are not red because they shout, but because your nervous system registers them before your mind can rationalize. When the air suddenly shifts in a room, when the energy constricts, when you feel your shoulders tighten for no reason, you're not overreacting. You're detecting what hasn't been said yet, and that is a superpower, not a flaw. The more you practice listening to these early signals, the less you'll need to clean up after emotional explosions. You'll catch the lie before it becomes a story, feel the manipulation before it becomes a dynamic. You'll leave conversations feeling whole instead of hollow. You'll stop giving people time they haven't earned and start protecting peace that was never theirs to disrupt. This isn't about paranoia, it's about precision. The empath's path is not to harden their heart, but to sharpen their awareness. Not to stop caring, but to stop confusing pain with purpose. When you see the micro cues clearly, you begin to realize the person who protects their peace early doesn't need to recover from chaos later. So the next time your body gives you a signal, pause, trust it, translate it, act on it. You're not imagining things, you're awakening. What if every moment of avoidance is secretly a fork in the road? One direction leads to a familiar loop, the other leads to the unknown, where your future self is quietly waiting. Most people don't realize how often they live 2 lives at once, the one they're enduring and the one they're capable of creating. This is where the empath's real battle begins, not against others, but against the internal hesitation to choose peace over performance. Let's pause here and ask a deeper question. What is the cost of not choosing yourself? For years, a woman might keep brushing off small violations from her partner, telling herself, "He's just tired," or "He doesn't mean it." But her body tells another story. Her nervous system is always on alert. She's drained by 4 p.m., and she hasn't laughed from her belly in years. One day, a moment comes, not dramatic, but decisive. She hears herself say in a calm voice, "This version of me no longer lives here." And something shifts. Or consider the man who always gave more than he received. He played peacemaker at work, caregiver at home, and audience member in every friendship. He believed love was earned through sacrifice. But one morning, he stood in front of the mirror and noticed how tired his eyes had become. Not from work, from self-abandonment. That was the day he put down the mask, even if no one noticed. especially because no one noticed, and that, strangely, gave him peace. The greatest illusion for empaths is that they must keep both lives alive, the inner truth and the outer harmony. But the longer we do this, the more the soul fractures. Healing begins not in a dramatic exit, but in a quiet alignment, a decision to stop feeding the false life, a sacred no more. In that moment, something beautiful happens. Real life begins to grow roots. You wake up and there's no dread in your chest. Your smile is no longer an effort. Conversations start to feel mutual, and your solitude becomes a sanctuary, not a sentence. This is not about perfection, it is about pattern breaking. You will still doubt yourself some days. You will still encounter people who test your worth. But now, there is a dividing line in your soul, a boundary not drawn in sand, but in stone. You know how it feels to betray yourself, and you've chosen not to anymore. That's the beginning of sovereignty. You do not need permission to walk toward your real life. You just need presence and choice. Every small choice adds weight to the life you are becoming. Every time you turn toward peace instead of proving, you plant a flag for your true self. So ask yourself, which life are you feeding? Which one are you willing to let starve? It is not selfish to choose the one that makes you feel alive. It is sacred. And when you do, you will not lose love. You will find the kind that sees you, not just uses you. And that is the quiet revolution. What if healing is less about what you say and more about what you structure? When the storm ends and clarity returns, many empaths make the same quiet discovery. Peace was never the absence of conflict. It was the presence of design, because without structure, your energy is still available to everyone who pulls at it. And without design, you may unintentionally recreate the chaos you walked away from. So here is the deeper question. How do you protect the life you are finally beginning to love? The answer is not in another confrontation, another explanation, or another apology for being unavailable. The answer is in building invisible systems that speak for you. Peace in this new phase is not reactive. It is proactive. It is architecture. You start small, but it is revolutionary. You schedule do not disturb blocks, not as a luxury, but as a necessity. You create email boundaries where replies are delayed, filtered, or simply not expected. You anchor your mornings in silence, not out of ego, but because your nervous system deserves to begin without demand. You walk into meetings with an agenda because your presence is not an open canvas for projection. You design respectful norms with those around you, making it clear that kindness is not compliance and accessibility is not obligation. Each of these choices is a brick in the fortress of self-respect. You are no longer a river absorbing every stone tossed into you. You are the landscape itself, defining where the river flows and what it nourishes. What changes is not just your schedule, but your identity. You stop being the default helper, the automatic listener, the emergency contact for emotional chaos. You become someone whose time holds value, whose energy has a rhythm, whose space is not negotiable. And this shift, while silent, rewrites every dynamic around you. Some people will resist this. They will call it cold, selfish, and distant. But that is only because they met a version of you that needed to be liked in order to feel safe. Now, they are meeting a version of you that feels safe enough to be whole. That difference unsettles those who depended on your self-abandonment, but this time you do not fold. You do not return. You simply breathe. You adjust your calendar. You lock your phone. You go for a walk. And without having to explain it, your silence communicates the truth. I will no longer shape myself to survive you. Boundaries are not fences that isolate. They are doors that open only to what aligns. They are filters that preserve joy. They are agreements with your soul that say, "This peace I fought for, I will protect it now with everything I am." And the best part? You do not need anyone's approval to design this life. You only need to believe that peace is not something you wait for. It is something you build daily, intentionally, lovingly, and when that structure is in place, your light becomes stable, not because you are untouched by the world, but because you have finally stopped letting the world rewrite you. Your power is not in how much you give. It is in how precisely you choose. You are no longer an open field. You are a sacred temple, and only those who honor your boundaries will ever step through the gate. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.